AT&T teleconferencing service. Enter your access code or meeting. Enter your attendee ID number, followed by Your line has been muted. Press star 6 to unmute your own line.
Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
Okay, a lot going on today. I want to begin with what I want to emphasize, I believe, is the most important story of the day, and that is Trump's refusal to commit to a peaceful transfer of power. If he loses, I think that this is the bedrock of American democracy, from which everything else flows. We don't have a justice system. We don't have a legal system. If this single principle is not upheld, and although I acknowledge that Donald Trump brings a can of gasoline to every conversation he has, I don't think we can dismiss this as just another moment of throwing gasoline on anything. This is, as I said, the bedrock of American democracy, and as a result, I believe the most important story of the day, and I believe it's why the Supreme Court story is so important, and it's why what Bill Barr has been saying is so important. So that is where I want to begin. So Washington, let's begin with that angle.
Okay, so at 5 o'clock yesterday afternoon, Trump made this extraordinary comment when asked if he would commit to the peaceful transfer of power, the basis of our Constitution. He says, we're going to have to see what happens. You know, I have been complaining very strongly about the ballots, and the ballots are a disaster. Get rid of the ballots, and there won't be a transfer, frankly. There will be a continuation, he added. It very clearly stating, again, how he feels about this. This comes on a day where, as you mentioned, he explicitly linked the Supreme Court vacancy to the election. He said it is important to have 9 justices prior to the election because the results of the election will wind up before the court, and it's important that we have 9 judges. Collinson claiming that using the language, it is stunning to see a president so frank about an inherent scheme to invalidate this election duel against Biden if he doesn't win. The key as we move forward this morning are the Republicans. The two that we have at this point, the more predictable ones are Romney saying it's unthinkable and unacceptable, Liz Cheney saying we took an oath to the Constitution, we will uphold that. But the focus of the Hill teams today are going to be to try to get all these other Republicans who have been nowhere to be seen in many of these other instances. Biden, for his part, reacted with disbelief, as he usually does when Trump makes these kinds of statements. And then just in terms of the voting angle on this that Kristen Holmes has today, this is voter suppression before our very eyes. Basically, he's saying to his supporters, even if you vote him out, he may not step aside. This combined with a very aggressive legal strategy in key states that the Trump campaign is doing behind the scenes, making it more difficult to vote and questioning the legitimacy. And all of this tied up with also what Trump was saying yesterday in order to use the federal government as its levers of power and on the FDA approval of the COVID vaccine. And he made it clear that he's willing to override the normal process, calling the process political. So I think those are sort of the big pieces of that story.
Okay, so I'm going to open it up after this, but I agree. The one other person besides, obviously, Mitt Romney, Liz Cheney, we also heard from Marco Rubio this morning. He came out as well. But to Virginia's points, we cannot just pay attention to Trump's words here. That's the easy part, and we should do that. But we have to dig much deeper on what all those legal moves that Virginia spoke about and what the campaign is doing right now. This is what Bart Gellman has written about in The Atlantic and what our teams have been reporting on. But this is my note to all of our producers and show teams. It is easy to just rely on Donald Trump's words. It is easy to just book contributors that Rebecca Cutler has on staff. What we need to do is actually do much more reporting and booking of folks who are involved in this legal fight right now and what's going on, and dig deeper than just the surface of his words. And then I would just add, as Virginia mentioned, Trump saying that the White House will make the decision on the COVID vaccine is equally egregious. Azar out this morning on the Today Show saying that politics will play no role. So now Azar is going against Trump on that. So we have to pay attention to that. I mean, I actually think those are the two most important things of the day. Let's open it up and talk about this, and then we're going to move to COVID. Anybody with any thoughts on this front?
Hey, Jeff, it's Marcus. I just want to say that thank you for underlining for the next 41 days or so. It's the story right now is these legal machinations, as Virginia put it, the aggressive moves at the state level. The campaign is making these plans right now. Bart Gellman was great on it. We have that video up on digital. We're framing digital in that way. We'll be going more into the aggressive legal moves as the day goes on, and we get that reporting. But I think it's the most important story starting right now, from now until Election Day. The Trump campaign is not waiting until Election Day. They're making machinations right now. And our system is not built for a president who won't concede or for a president who plans to use a lever of power to make sure, for instance, that states, he can run out the clock on close states so that the mail-in votes aren't counted by the certification day of December 14th. So that's just one little piece of it. But yeah, there's so much, it's happening right now.
Marcus, I, by the way, if I wasn't clear, thank you for, I agree with everything you just said. And this isn't just the most important story today. This is the most important story for the next, 41 days, because this is it. Everything else flows from this. And so I agree with everything you just said, Marcus.
Jeff, Ben, I think you were clear on this as well, but just to sort of pile on here, the latest polling that we have from CNN and also that we've seen from others showed already that the majority of Americans would wait to get a vaccine because they didn't trust it. I don't know how anyone could trust it after what the president said yesterday and how you would expect anyone to take it or have any confidence in it whatsoever. I don't think it is possible to overplay this enough. Just to have the president say this is fine, take it without the scientists saying that it is safe and effective. And to underscore what Sanjay said on New Day this morning, it is not so much a question about efficacy, it is a question about safety, because as Montez Fleury told Sanjay in an interview just recently, you really need to get out to that 2-month mark before you can be sure that no one is going to have these adverse effects. And when you open up the vaccine to such a wider population, these events that look rare and showed up once or twice show up thousands of times once you're giving it to more people potentially. So I just don't think we can possibly do enough on that either.
Okay. Others?
Jeff, I wanted to suggest that I think that visually to show the number of dictators in recent history who have used democratic processes to then become dictators. So they've used democracy to get into power and then basically destroyed democracy. And to put the faces of who they are, it's a terrifying visual. And I think that would be a very interesting graphic at some point to develop. And there are several of them.
I think Cynthia, it's a really good note. And again, this is what I want to emphasize to our producers and our show teams and to our digital team. Dig deeper. Let's not just rely on his words. Let's do the reporting here. Other thoughts?
Hey, Jeff, this is John Avalon. Just building on that, the Gelman article breaks out some places that we can follow through on. It's the sunsetting of consent decrees, which all of a sudden makes Trump's statements about the sheriffs so big. It's looking at individual states like Wisconsin and Pennsylvania and talking to Republican election lawyers like Trevor Potter or Rob Kellner, who might be able to give insight into the kind of mechanisms they've run in the past and how it could be on steroids now. So just those narrow cuts could be really revealing in terms of what they're trying to pull off.
I totally agree, and that's the point I'm trying to make about booking those voices as well. So 100% agreed, and we need to do that reporting.
And our election team is doing all of that. We have, they've been in extensive contact with everyone. So both Kristen and Pam's anchoring today, but have a lot on this.
Anyone else?
Hey, Jeff, just two notes. One is, as you mentioned, Liz Cheney and Romney and Rubio, but as we hear from these Republican senators, I do think we have to take what they say in the context of if 40-something of them have entirely flip-flopped just in the last few days on the Supreme Court nomination. So their direct words to the point where Lindsey Graham said, throw my words in my face. I'm saying this now, but totally flip-flopped. I mean, I don't know whether or not you can rely on it in sort of a hypothetical situation as opposed to when it really happens and where they'll be. If they have the chance to have a Republican president, do we really honestly think that they're going to contest Trump's victory, even if it's illegitimate or questionable? I don't know. I mean, I just, in the context of what we've just gone through in the last few days with, again, there were 41 or 42 on the record as you can't do this in an election year 4 years ago, and now they've all changed their minds. So I think that context is important, and just to think about as we're hearing from them, and why should we trust what they say today as opposed to 3 days ago or 4 years ago? And the other thing is on Azar saying politics won't be a part of it. I just want to note that Trump actually said the FDA's update on how they were going to manage the vaccine approval, he claimed that was political. So the only thing I would say about Azar now being opposed to Trump is that the president actually claimed politics for the reason that the FDA did what it did and that he wasn't going to tolerate that he wasn't going to have politics be part of it. Azar said politics are not going to be part of this. That doesn't necessarily put him in opposition to Trump. They're saying the FDA is political, so, or at least Trump was. So I just would question whether or not Azar is actually against Trump or siding with him on this.
Okay.
I just wanted to recommend people look at booking secretaries of state, and especially the battleground states, because they're the actual people who are going to be administering the elections. And I think so many people are watching all this and scratching their heads and wondering how they should vote. Like maybe they thought they were going to mail in their votes, but now they don't trust that and they have questions. And I think hearing from their local officials about what their reaction is to what Trump said is going to be a powerful decider as people try to evaluate what they should do with their vote this year.
Those are the bookings we need. Anyone else?
I have one question. It's Liza for Ben, I guess. Have we reached out to the pharmaceutical companies to ask them if they would move ahead with releasing a vaccine if the president bypassed the FDA?
Since last night, I don't believe that we have. That's on our short list for this morning, and we will circle back on that.
Thanks.
I mean, they made that pledge a while ago, as you remember, that they wouldn't put it up. But what could they do otherwise now in light of this? We will be chasing that this morning.
Okay, so I think that's a good segue to COVID, and let's start with Matthew, please.
Okay, so going a little deeper now on politics versus science, going to a whole new level here. You'll remember we started in this meeting here yesterday with the question of whether the White House would actually let the FDA go through with these tighter vaccine rules because they could extend the timeline. Then we heard the top scientists on the Hill for hours and hours insisting they would accept no political pressure. Then the president spelled out exactly how he might exert political pressure. So we mentioned the Azar comments and however you interpret those, but I think the question for every task force member and top doc, as we ask now, is what are you going to do about it? What now? Hahn said yesterday the FDA will not permit pressure from anyone. And you'll remember Hahn weeks ago said that resigning is an option if pressured to authorize a vaccine too soon. And all this in the wake of our reporting yesterday from Jim Acosta that Birx is distressed by her reduced role in the task force and whether she will stay. And even after all of this, both Fauci and now Azar basically saying that this will all be okay because of this independent review board that is not beholden to the White House or the FDA. So both Sanjay and Elizabeth are doing more reporting now about what we know about this data monitoring board and who's on it and how that all works. And then just in the big picture, the two big cautions about where we stand now. Redfield saying more than 90% of the population remains susceptible, and Fauci reminding us that we will not see a large portion of the population vaccinated by year's end. On the key numbers, the uptick is definitely palpable. We are averaging daily numbers up in the range from a month ago again. Yesterday alone saw almost 1,100 deaths and over 37,000 cases. And in total, about 202,000 deaths and almost 7 million cases in the U.S. On our CNN map, 21 states up week to week in new cases. And again, it's almost all of the Western states in the red zone. The sharpest weekly increases in Minnesota, Wisconsin, which are the places Pence heads today, as well as Montana, Utah, Texas, and Arizona. We've got Lucy Kavanaugh in Denver, where Colorado is up 43% week to week in new cases. We reported on Missouri's governor and his wife testing positive, and the CDC crunching the numbers on airlines, finding 11,000 people at risk of being infected on 1,600 flights over the course of months. We've also got the continuing education crisis with Bianca Golodriga and Evan McMorris-Santoro. And then a little more from the health team. Sanjay interviews Fauci again this afternoon at 2:30 in an Emory Fireside Chat, so a good place to go back to all these questions that we started with. And then we've got the NIH director telling Wolf last night that likely 2 more vaccines will soon enter final stage trials in the U.S. after Johnson & Johnson became the 4th to do so yesterday. The FDA authorizing the first results on site point of care antibody test to see if you've been previously affected, and some new preliminary research about the virus mutating. Nothing to panic about, the scientists say. This is what viruses do. The mutation is making perhaps the virus more contagious, but not more deadly. And Sanjay's got this piece on the top misconceptions around COVID, misconceptions and myths often propagated by the White House, and Elizabeth available as well. On sports and COVID, the Pac-12 meets today and may vote on a decision to return to college football in the next couple of months. There are lots of disruptions to college football still. Houston had their 5th game postponed because of results on an opponent's team. The SEC starting Saturday. And then we've got the wrap pieces, Erica Hill, 468, Nick Watt, 5, 7, and 9. And I'll pause there.
Thank you very much, Matthew. Yep, thank you. International COVID.
Hey, so I'll start with Israel again, where we heard the government has approved even tighter lockdowns starting Friday, a full closure for 2 weeks of all industries except essential ones like supermarkets and pharmacies. It's just interesting because this is like a full lockdown of the like we saw in March and April, not so much the lighter lockdowns we're seeing across Europe now. He can also weave in how COVID is hitting Bibi's popularity and triggering more political divisions in the country. So Oren has all of that reporting. Cyril in London is looking at how the UK is exploring the possibility of trials in which volunteers are deliberately exposed to COVID to test the effectiveness of vaccine candidates. It could come in January, but we're looking into those reports. We're also looking at how the government finally has launched its test and trace app as they deal with their spikes and all the news out of the UK this week. More broadly across Europe, it's a decisive moment in dealing with the second wave, cold weather flu season approaching. There are more bans in key French cities, a second German minister testing positive, new ski rules in Austria, but we're also keeping an eye at 11 a.m. There's a WHO presser where we'll get more updates on the Europe situation, and Melissa Bell is on that. And then just Paula Newton continues the fallout from the rare Trudeau comments last night to the nation, just how Canada's second wave is underway in most of the country.
Okay, thank you. Business COVID?
Jeff, good morning. Dow futures extending their losses after yet another devastating piece of data moments ago. 870,000 workers filed for first-time claims last week in unemployment benefits. We are 6 months into the crisis, and weekly claims are still 4 times higher than they were before businesses went into lockdown in March. Currently, 26 million people are currently receiving some type of unemployment aid. Christine Romans has broken that down on New Day. And of course, all talk is on the failed state of stimulus. Yesterday, Mnuchin and Powell briefed members of the House saying that loan programs are working, but more is certainly needed to keep the economy afloat, especially as those hundreds of thousands of unemployment claims continue to pour in. Powell and Mnuchin are back on the Hill today in front of the Senate, and Christina Leshy is tracking that. Meanwhile, corporate America continuing to sound the alarm. The Business Roundtable Consortium of America's top CEOs also worried about the inaction over stimulus, and Goldman Sachs this morning slashing its economic forecast in half because Congress is unlikely to get its act together on more federal aid. Just quickly, in entertainment, worth noting the Metropolitan Opera, one of the nation's largest performing arts organizations, saying it is forced to cancel its entire 2021 season. This obviously a bellwether to other live events. And of course, as we reported, Disney's confidence in movie theaters' ability to recover is certainly waning as they push back theatrical releases of the Marvel blockbuster Black Widow. Alison Kosik is up on that. And lastly, we're looking at the airline industry, which has been completely turned upside down in about 6 days. Thousands of airline employees could be furloughed. As we know, airline executives went to D.C. hat in hand seeking a $25 billion bailout. Well, United this morning announcing that for the first time it is offering COVID testing for passengers on some of its airlines. And of course, this announcement follows what Matthew just mentioned, the CDC investigation showing upwards of 11,000 people could have potentially been exposed to the virus on flights. Pete Muntean is available on all those threads, and that's where we begin on COVID.
Thank you, Richard. Washington.
So the big COVID thing, other than the regulation part of this, is we expected 4:30 today Donald Trump to announce his health care plan that has been promised for a long time now. It is very unclear whether we'll get any specifics from him and how exactly this whole executive action to protect pre-existing conditions will play out. So that will be the big COVID thing here today.
Okay, let's open it up for healthcare or COVID. Anything there?
When we get
okay, go ahead.
When we hear the president's announcement today, if he does executive orders, just remember the last executive orders he did, which were the executive orders that all Americans were going to have their payroll tax relief. Those executive orders were not worth anything at all, and we have to be incredibly skeptical of any executive orders he puts out today, and we should not take them at face value because he has a track record of executive orders that are meaningless.
And the other thing, just to add here, John Horowitz pointing out, it is impossible to protect people with pre-existing conditions in the absence of the Affordable Care Act. Like, you just can't do it. So just making sure that the underlying health part of all of this, we don't lose.
Okay. Anyone else?
Hey, Jeff, this is kind of COVID and election related, but I just don't think we can underestimate the impact of what an essentially hung election in the U.S. could do to an already depressed economy. I know Richard Davis touched on this, but I just think, the market sentiment couldn't be more sour right now, both because of COVID and just all the turmoil that is set to happen in the U.S. elections and the impact globally. I just think could get really bad November, December in the markets as well.
Okay. Matthew, let's move to Breonna Taylor, please.
Gotcha. So in the wake of that decision, the fallout and the unrest and the big unanswered question still, which I will get to in just a second. First, just to catch up in the last 12 hours, obviously police targeted amid the outrage. 2 officers shot in Louisville, recovering amid the unrest last night. A suspect in custody, the FBI asking for the public's help and more information. About 100 arrests in Louisville, curfew still in place. Protests in cities around America, many of them peaceful, a few of them not, including a Molotov cocktail thrown at police in Portland and bottles thrown at officers in Seattle. And we've got reporters keeping an eye on this everywhere. But in terms of where the case questions go next, the huge question still on why the raid took place in the first place and what led up to it and what was presented to the grand jury and how. Ben Crump this morning on New Day saying that the Taylor family is demanding to see a grand jury transcript. Crump has been calling this a sham proceeding that did not give Breonna Taylor a voice here, questions what or whether any evidence was presented about Breonna Taylor's death in this. The short answer on the transcript from legal is that in Kentucky, a judge can order a transcript released to parties. But again, it's tricky. We'll see if this happens. The governor and mayor also demanding the attorney general release the evidence presented to the grand jury. The FBI still investigating the way the police department obtained that no-knock warrant and any possible federal violations here, and lots of skepticism outstanding about the claim yesterday that the officers announced themselves according to a witness, because there are other witnesses who say they did not, and the internal investigation, the former officer who was charged, Hankerson, out on bond on those wanton endangerment charges. Of course, the reaction far and wide, family, politics, sports, culture, the family through attorneys saying they're devastated and outraged. We learned this morning they got just a few minutes notice before the announcement and weren't even initially told the charges did not relate to Breonna's death itself. The mother's attorney can't understand, talking to me this morning, how you could consider the neighbors in danger and victims of wanton endangerment and not Breonna Taylor herself. I know we'll get to this a little more in politics, but we've got Biden's comments both about how the decision didn't answer the call for justice, but also the officer shooting. Violence can never be the answer. The reactions from Colin Kaepernick about the white supremacist institution and it must be abolished. LeBron James saying the most disrespected person on earth is the black woman, the WNBA as well. And then in terms of our troops on this, we've got Bryn's been up this morning, Jason Carroll handling 4, 6, and 8, Shimon Prokupez 5 and 7, Mark Morales on the ground, Drew Griffin playing in as we try to fill in all those unanswered questions. I think that's it.
Okay, I want to open it up before we move on for any thoughts on Breonna Taylor case and Louisville and the protests and anything that anybody wants to talk about. Okay, Matthew, anything else from you, or is that it?
That's really it.
Okay, international.
Hey, so we're also really going big on the Trump election lines and race protests, but just a couple of nuggets. Seoul says North Korea killed and burned a South Korea official who crossed the border. It sparked outrage at a time when relations are as tense as ever. So Paula Hancock has a look live on what we know there. Matthew Chance will continue his reporting on the Russian opposition leader, but he's also watching Belarus today. The EU rejected the inauguration of Lukashenko yesterday, and security forces are now cracking down heavily on those continuing protests. So we're also on that.
And I believe yesterday the U.S. State Department refused to recognize Belarus because he wouldn't give up a peaceful transfer of power, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah.
So there you go. There you go. Business?
Jeff, we're watching misinformation continuing to flourish before the election. Brian Fung reporting this morning, Facebook announcing that its oversight board is going to begin taking content appeal cases within weeks. Of course, this comes as critics worry about the social media giant's impact on the U.S. election less than 2 months away. And I just want to highlight Donnie O'Sullivan and Daniel Dale, and fantastic cataloging all of these instances. We have Don Jr. touting baseless election rigging claims and videos posted on Facebook, asking able-bodied people to join the election security army. Eric Trump also tweeted a video that falsely claimed Joe Biden was caught red-handed using a teleprompter during an interview with Telemundo. And, so we are tracking all of these, and both Daniel and Donnie have been fantastic and available. And that's where we start.
Thank you. Washington.
Okay, so just to back up for a minute on a couple things. Lindsey Graham was on Fox this morning, and he, on this whole question of transfer of power, explicitly, again, linked the Supreme Court to the election. He said that Republicans will accept the Supreme Court's decision on the winner of the election. And as I promise you, as a Republican, if the Supreme Court rules in favor of Joe Biden, I will accept that result. So, again, tying those two. The other thing that we're just putting out now, which is one of these developing storylines, is numbers behind the increase on absentee ballot requests. This year in North Carolina alone, it just surpassed 1 million. This is an 11-fold increase from where we were in 2016. So just to note those two things. At 10 o'clock, the President and First Lady will visit, go up to the Hill to the Supreme Court for RBG. The other person on Capitol Hill today, Ray, is back up there. There's obviously the other threat to the election in Russia, and we'll see how what he has to say on that today. And Mark Hart will handle that. And just the Trump schedule today is he has a 4:30 event in North Carolina, and then 7 o'clock in a rally in Jacksonville. And I've got politics.
And then let's do politics.
Okay, so on politics, we talked about his Biden's remarks on the peaceful transfer of power on Breonna Taylor. He said that he knows for many it does not answer the call for equal justice. He also quickly tweeted that violence is never and can be the answer. So that just trying to walk that line. There's a slew of new polls out this morning, and I know that we don't want to do too much on polls, but just interesting that there is just this developing story about how close some of these states, including Iowa, Georgia, and Texas, all are. The battleground states are also close, but these are ones that Trump easily won in 2016. And then just to note this new Biden TV ad that they released that focuses around suckers and losers and trying to capitalize on that. Biden we will not see today. He is heavily in debate press. And that's what I got.
I would like to say that I think we are already way too focused on polls, and we should just back way off on all of our poll coverage. Okay, let's open it up for thoughts on any of these aspects or anything else people want to talk about.
Hey, Jeff, it's David. Can you hear me?
You sure can.
It seems like a million years ago, but yesterday we had a pretty extensive discussion about the role of some of these Catholic groups in the Supreme Court. There's really an excellent write-up by a Villanova University professor on the church named Massimo Fagioli in Politico that gets to the heart of it. I recommend it to everybody, and I think if we're going to talk about Amy Coney Barrett's affiliations, we should book this guy. And it's written from the standpoint of a Catholic theologian, so I think it has an extra level of insight and credibility.
Okay, let's absolutely move on David's idea, please. Make sure that he's a guest through our coverage if and when she gets named. Other thoughts? Anyone else? Digital.
Hey, we had 29 million yesterday, and not surprisingly, the Breonna Taylor grand jury announcement was our number one story. Dr. Birx was the second story. The question of how long can she stay, according to our source. RBG clerk standing guard, and Trump refusing to commit to a peaceful transition, even though that came late in the day. That runs our top four for yesterday. Overnight, the South Korean official who was shot dead in North Korea was our winner. Right now, we have the Collinson piece that's leading on the sites that is topping everything at more than 15,000 concurrents. Top video overnight, top video right now has been Bart Gellman on the homepage is the Bart Gellman story, the Bart Gellman video about the Trump team's plans scare him. And on the app, it is the Amy Coney Barrett comments in 2016. Plans today, of course, are all the stories we laid out, the Trump actions and moves and the dangerousness thereof. The tech companies enabling of Trump, and we'll have Donnie's piece will give prominence later on kind of how folks are actually being misled. The misinformation has been incredibly successful already in this campaign. Coronavirus is our second big story. We have a great distinctive coming on food insecurity issues in America. All those who are often forgotten in this crisis that's unfolding. And we'll also have the Alison Camarada panel cut for digital as part of our coverage there. We'll stay on the Breonna Taylor follow-ups, of course. And we have great op-eds, I should mention, from Laura Coates and from John Avalon. So thank you for those. And then final note, there is a distinctive, right now, an op-ed from Lena Headey, who plays Ciri Lannister on Game of Thrones. She's her op-ed talks about her experience on the Isle of Moria, the Isle of Lesbos, the Moria camp of refugees in Greece. It is the gateway to a collaboration between CNN International and the Imperial War Museum in London, an interactive exhibit on modern-day refugees. So that's it for us. Thanks.
Thank you, Marcus. John.
So on the Trump transfer of power and all the fallout from what he said last night, John Harwood and Caitlin Collins at the White House, Lauren Fox and Manu Raju are chasing GOP response on the Hill, and we are going for some of those senators and representatives ourselves, if we can get them booked, including another one that was mentioned earlier, Representative Steve Stivers from Ohio GOPer, who's also critical of what Trump had to say. So we'll continue to go for those voices. And then next hour, there is a Senate hearing on Homeland Security issues. FBI head Wray is testifying. We're monitoring. Alex Marquardt is also watching, and we'll see if he takes any questions on election security or anything that Trump said. Kristen Holmes stays on the Trump campaign legal maneuvers. A couple of bookings around that. John King has attorney Ben Ginsburg, who's advised many a campaign on legal issues. So we'll get him up on what the Trump campaign is trying to pull off in various states. And Brianna does have the Michigan Secretary of State, who has certainly found herself on the receiving end of a ton of Trump criticism. So other voices rounding out our coverage, Brian Karam, who asked the pivotal question yesterday, Douglas Brinkley, David Gergen. Later on today with Brianna, we do have Martin Gelman, who wrote the Atlantic article that paints a pretty dire picture of what we can be facing in a couple of months, and Julian Delazer. But it's definitely a big focus today, the transfer of power comments. On coronavirus, Sanjay, along with Dr. Peter Hotez, Paul Offit, and Richard Besser on Trump's threats involving the FDA and the dangers of trying to rush a vaccine before it's ready. We'll watch for any other reaction to these two Fauci events, the 11 a.m. with the New Jersey governor, and then the 2 o'clock one. The Sanjay's moderating. Elizabeth Cohen wraps up all the other health headlines. We see Kavanaugh on the spiking cases out west. And Pete Montine, we'll look to get him in the mix on the United Airlines now beginning to roll out COVID testing for passengers. Bryn Gingras on all the advanced threads. Breonna Taylor, Kentucky governor, was just on with Jim and Poppy. We have a number of other community leaders in Louisville, including the head of the NAACP, and we'll stay on those legal questions. What will the FBI's next move be at their investigation, and will we ever see what was presented to the grand jury? And two more things to mention. Trump does honor RBG in about 20 minutes in the Supreme Court, so we'll land on that picture. And Victor Blackwell has a piece helping push ahead to Good Trouble, and it's airing this weekend here on CNN.
Great. Thank you. Washington.
Morning. Pam is in for Jake at 4 o'clock. Caitlin, of course, the White House, the peaceful transfer of power. We're going to cover both the words and the actions. We've got Senator Mazie Hirono, and we booked Pennsylvania AG Josh Shapiro, who's on the front lines. Of course, he's been battling the Trump campaign, just argued before the Pennsylvania Supreme Court on this and is in federal courts as well. Erica Hill has our coronavirus red spot. We've got Sanjay, Jason Carroll on the Brianna fallout, and Gary Tuckman looks at Susan Collins and the Maine Senate race.
And in the Situation Room, we have two bookings of note. The President's Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows. So we'll obviously hit him hard on the peaceful transfer of power, the politicization of the vaccine, and the so-called healthcare plan that the president's going to be announcing. We also have HR McMaster, so he'll be good on those topics as well. From there, we'll be following on all those those two threads throughout. We'll be following on the COVID numbers continuing to move in the wrong direction, more than 1,000 deaths just yesterday. We'll keep an eye on Sanjay's interview with Fauci, and we'll have our wrap pieces as well as our international whips. We'll watch Trump at 4:30, and we'll be keeping an eye on Ray on the Hill, and then we'll obviously be following on any developments in the Breonna Taylor case and see where that all goes today.
Okay, thank you, Emily. Anybody else got anything they want to bring up?
Hey, Jeff, I just want to say one thing about the president's remarks on healthcare in North Carolina today. I think we have to be careful about calling it a healthcare plan. From what I've read in our own reporting and in others' stories about this, he's going to say some things that he wants to do with healthcare. They also have this executive order, which doesn't necessarily really do anything in terms of pre-existing conditions. But I don't think we should call it a healthcare, that he's laying out a healthcare plan or that this is his healthcare plan. There's nothing on paper that we have. A healthcare plan would be an extensive document with all kinds of ways that if Obamacare is overturned, they would fill all of the voids that would create. So I would not reference it as a healthcare plan. I think we can say he's making remarks on healthcare. He's made some proposals about what he wants to do with healthcare, but I wouldn't call it a plan.
That's a really good note for our shows to follow today. Any other thoughts? Okay, obviously the transfer of power and beyond just Trump's words, because that's easy, but digging deeper into what legal moves the campaign is already doing. The latest on COVID and the dramatic increase in cases, especially in the western half of the United States. The vaccine and the politicization of the vaccine with Trump's comments last night and his potential healthcare remarks today. Breonna Taylor and the latest threads and follows on that story, I think are the main storylines for us to follow today. Have a good day, everybody. Bye-bye.